The disputed territory of South Ossetia on the Russian border. As Russia and Georgia battled over control, the shooting and shelling and bombing left the region devastated. Scott Taylor is publisher of Esprit magazine. He's just returned from a 15-day trip to South Ossetia. He joins us this morning in Ottawa. Good morning.
Good morning.
Tell me, I guess, a little bit about the reasons why you decided to go to that area and how it compared to what you expected to find versus what you found there.
Well, it was something when it flared up. I mean, obviously it was coincided with the opening ceremonies of the Beijing Olympics, so people were taken a bit by surprise. The news coverage sort of didn't know what to focus on, and then suddenly the Russians were pouring into this region, and people began to take a little bit of notice, but it really wasn't understood. And of course, in Canada, Prime Minister Harper took the American line. We supported Georgia. We went in and denounced this as Russian aggression, which, I mean, having followed it a little closer and you know, been involved in the region before, realized that no, this was something which, I mean, obviously the Georgians had provoked, and very little was being reported about those initial 72 hours when the Georgians went in against the South Ossetians alone and what had happened there. So I went in basically to research that period of time, which was very little understood.
And also very confusing because, as you mentioned, I mean, right away they supported Russia, thinking that Russia was the aggressor. What did you find out was to be the truth over those 72 hours?
Well, I mean, in the initial attacks, I mean, the Georgians hit what they called the Russian peacekeeper barracks. The Russians had left since 2004 troops there to protect the ceasefire line. There's been 4 conflicts since 1989 between the Georgians and South Ossetians. So I mean, it was relatively a frozen conflict, but always a sort of a simmering volcano about to erupt. So the Russians had troops there. 150 were killed in that initial attack by Grom rockets. And then, of course, the attack moved in. The entire region, which is only 76 kilometers deep, was inflamed. I mean, I saw the level of damage in the villages and then in the city, the Tiskinval, the capital. I mean, it was incredible the amount of fighting that took place there. And again, knowing there's only 25,000 Ossetians in total that still live there, 2,000 were killed in this last wave of fighting. So that's a huge amount of the population. So, I mean, incredible level of destruction.
You know, when you talk about this area and some of the confusion that you're, trying to clear up in terms of your research and writing on it, it's strategic, and I guess, it's complicated because you're dealing with a lot of ethnicities and in terms of its location in the countries surrounding it. But give us a sense of why it's so strategic.
Well, I mean, the Caucasus, as soon as you pull back, and that was where my tour was focusing on, the Caucasus in general, there's so many frozen conflicts. You've got the Caspian Sea oil reserves. You've got the fact that Azerbaijan is now pumping 1 million barrels a day through Georgia out to Turkey, away from Iran and Russian interests. I mean, this is, in terms of overall strategy or strategic resources in the world, I mean, it's a very important flashpoint. It's always been the sort of culmination of the Russian, Soviet, Iranian, Persian, and Ottoman Turkish empires all come together. This is like their sort of area of the Balkans, whatever you want to call it. And now you've got America getting its footprint on that territory as well, in the terms of them backing President Saakashvili, who felt he had the blessing of the Americans and by extraction the blessing of Canada as well to launch this attack. So, and again, our Prime Minister here has yet to denounce the initial Georgian aggression, which I think needs to be pointed out that, in fact, it was pretty horrific.
And I understand you visited, one of the places that you visited was a hospital. Tell me about that.
This gave an idea of the level of fighting, I mean, that was taking place. The city was cut off. Tiskinval, the small capital, immediately surrounded. The Georgian troops got into it. They began to shell the hospital, of all things. Tremendous amount of damage was done there, and they performed in 72 hours 700 operations in the basement of that hospital, which is basically an unfinished concrete basement. They were doing operations by candlelight. So to go down there and see the conditions in which they were trying to operate it and to save lives, the doctors were giving their own blood to patients before performing surgery. They were so short of everything, of course, and then finally, after 3 days, the Russian troops broke through and they were able to evacuate some of the casualties. But again, I mean, 2,000 Ossetians were killed and 700 needed emergency surgery in those first few days.
Okay, wow, fascinating. Scott Taylor, thank you for joining us.